Hello, welcome to this video. It's very nice to have you here. My name is Rhianna and today I want to talk about some brilliant books that I've read so far this autumn. So I've always loved reading, but I think because of the myriad of entertainment options there are in modern life, I do sometimes find myself being more drawn to watching TV or playing my Nintendo or staring at a wall. But recently, in the past few months, I've just wanted to read when I get home from work, when I wake up in the morning. I just want to read. And I think I'm on that reading high because I just keep reading great books. And so I just want to continue reading books so I can keep finding great stories. Also, I just love autumn. And I think autumn does encourage reading. I love sitting inside on a cold autumn evening with a hot chocolate and a good book. It's so calming. And today I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about some of those brilliant books that I've read recently. So first I want to talk about Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This book is part of the Stormlight Archive and the first book is Way of Kings. Words of Radiance is the second book. And I read Way of Kings last year and it was my favourite book that I read, and I'm happy to report Words of Radiance is just as good, if not better. And it's quite hard to talk about Words of Radiance without spoiling what happens in Way of Kings. So instead, I'm just going to try and convince you to pick up the Stormlight Archive series by telling you a little bit about what Way of Kings is about. So in Way of Kings, we follow three protagonists. We have Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. Kaladin is a soldier and we find him at the beginning of Way of Kings in quite a dire position. He has lost everything and he's trying to rise from the ashes of that. And Shallan is a scholar and she's trying to steal this magical fabrial from another scholar without that scholar being aware that she's stealing it. And Dalinar is the brother of the king that is murdered at the beginning of Way of Kings, and he's trying to deal with the political fallout of that. And as much as I love the fantasy world that is created in these stories, I think why I love them so much is the characters. I love Kaladin, Shallan and Dalinar, and I think I haven't been so connected to characters like this ever throughout my reading experience. I would just read a whole book about these characters just hanging around and talking and not really doing anything because I just love them that much. And the magic system is also really cool. So in this world, if you're lucky enough, you have a shard blade, which is kind of like a lightsaber. And also there are these spren. So for example, if you are really afraid, fear spren might come off you, which are like these little fairies. And Kaladin has a spren of his own called Syl, and they have a really wonderful bond. And I would say before I move on that these books are quite long. They're over 1,000 pages each, which it's quite longer than your average book, but I think it's definitely worth it. Next I want to talk about Hamnet by Maggie. This book is coming out as a film later this year or early next year, and it's directed by Chloe Zhao, who directed No Man Land, and it looks really beautiful. I'll leave a link to the trailer down below because it's definitely worth a watch. Watching the trailer convinced me to pick up the book. So this book is about William Shakespeare, but also not really about William Shakespeare. So you may realise that Hamnet, the word, is very similar to the word Hamlet, and that is because William Shakespeare had a son called Hamnet, and a few years after Hamnet died as a child, William Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. And the book is really about William Shakespeare and his family dealing with the death of Hamnet. I also really liked how this book was structured. So you have the present and you have the past. In the present, you have Hamlet's point of view, and in the past, you see how Agnes and William met and how they fell in love. And the past moves more quickly and the present moves more slowly. And so slowly, the past is catching up with the present. And I also really enjoyed a chapter which is about how the plague spread throughout Europe in the 1500s. So it occurred because a man had contact with a monkey and a flea from that monkey went onto the man. And then that man went back onto his ship, which was transporting goods, and he then had the plague. So he spread the plague to other people on the ship, and then the goods on the ship got infected as well, and then it just spread throughout Europe and caused such pain and devastation. And it feels as if the writer had the ending image in mind and then wrote the book to lead up to that ending. The ending was so affecting and just really, really good. And I also really enjoyed the medieval setting. So I've been playing a lot of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is set in the Middle Ages, and yeah, I find that setting so comforting, even though I'm sure a lot of bad things happened in the Middle Ages, a lot of plague, a lot of death, but I find it was a simpler time, and so I find it a bit comforting. And I wrote some words down that as I was reading that I associated with the Middle Ages. So you have like herbs like comfrey and valerian, you have tanners don't think tanners are really jobs anymore. Maybe in the countryside. And the writing is also very good. I want to highlight a very random phrase in the book that I enjoyed. But there's a part where a character sits on an armchair and the arms of the chair are described as apple smooth. And I thought that was such a visceral image, because armchairs do get a bit worn and therefore they do get very smooth like an apple. And yeah, very good writing. Next, I wanted to talk about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. What a great title. This book is by a Polish author, and I've been wanting to read more works in translation. I was interested in reading from an author from Poland because I lived in Warsaw for a year, and this book is also set in Poland. It's set in the south of Poland, and it mentions a few locations such as Warsaw and other locations within Poland that I've been to, like Szczecin and Wrocław. So yeah, it's always nice to read a book which has like locations or is set in a location that you've been to, because you recognise things. And this book is about a woman who lives in the mountains, and her neighbours start to die. They start to die in mysterious ways which suggest that they have been killed, and it's a mystery as to what is going on. And although that is a plot that runs throughout the narrative, I think this book, the highlight of this book is the main character. She is so funny and weird, and a lot of the book is her just pondering about life and telling you her musings on life, and it's really enjoyable to hear from her perspective. I think if you're interested in books that have just really unique and singular protagonists, this is definitely one to pick up. There's so many wonderful lines that she has. One that has stayed on my mind that I've been thinking about daily is I would like to live in everlasting dusk. And I agree, I think it would be quite nice to live in everlasting dusk. There's also a quote that says the sun was red from the effort of rising, and I thought that was really beautiful writing as well. Also, like Hamnet, well, they have very different endings, but like Hamnet, the ending of this book is a crescendo, a very great moment that it feels like the whole book is leading to. Next, I want to quickly talk about two short story collections that I've recently read. One is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, and one is Things We Lost in the Fire by Marina Enriquez. And I recently made a video, which I uploaded a few days ago, about these two books and also another short story collection that I've read. And they are both fantastic short story collections. So Her Body and Other Parties is very lyrical and poetic. It has a lot of metaphors and interesting ideas running through it. For example, one of the stories, The Husband Stitch, is about a world in which women all have a ribbon attached to them, and if they lose that ribbon, they die. Another story is about a woman who goes to an artist retreat in the mountains, and it's a bit weird and really unsettling, something like The Shining. There are also stories in this collection that are a bit harder to understand on the surface, and you have to dig deeper to try and find the meaning, which can be fun. Things We Lost in the Fire is a bit spookier and a bit darker than Her Body and Other Parties. Things Lost in the Fire is very much a horror collection. It's very grotesque in parts, and it's very stark imagery that's not for the faint of heart. My favourite story within the collection is a story called The Dirty Kid, which is about this woman who lives in Buenos Aires. She lives in this rather poverty-stricken neighbourhood, and she forms this connection with a young homeless boy on the street, and it's seared on my mind now. It's a very memorable short story. And if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on those collections, please take a look at the video I made recently. I'll link it down below. Next, I read a standalone fantasy because I love fantasy, but often fantasy books are connected to quite large series, and sometimes I feel daunted because I want to complete the series, but like, will I find time to do that? So a standalone fantasy seemed attractive because it's not going to take many hours. And this book is called Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. I watched a lot of videos on YouTube which recommended the book. It has a 4.6 or something like that. Quite a high rating on Goodreads, and I can see why. What is this book about? This book is about a woman named Sayona. She lives in this fantasy world and she wants to become a mage, but in this world, women aren't mages. So she is going to this interview, this test, to try and get into this like fantasy university, but she has a lot of obstacles in her way because no woman has ever passed that test and got into the university. And the magic system is really interesting. They have these typewriters which they put spells into, and then they siphon magic from this other realm, and they take that energy to create magic. And I would say in the first half of this book I was enjoying it, but it did feel quite a little bit cliche and familiar for me, because it is that magic school trope, and I think any book that is writing about a magic school will inevitably, for me, just feel a bit like familiar, because I've read that trope quite a lot. But there is something that happens halfway through the story that is a big twist and turns the story from a good story for me to a great story. This novel, the themes that it's looking at are things like capitalism, oppression, and also ignorance. And I think those themes were explored really well. And because those are the themes that the novel explores, there are a lot of discussions between the character of Siona and her workmate named Tommel about those issues. And I read in a few reviews that some people found the themes a bit heavy-handed or a bit on the nose, and I can see where that criticism comes from, but I don't think I necessarily agree with it, because I think just because themes are explored very explicitly and not in the subtext of a story does not mean that it's a fault. I think Emma Wang had a point to make, and she made it exceptionally well. Okay, I'm now losing my voice a little bit, so I think that's all I'm going to be able to say now. But please let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought. Have you read a great book recently? I'd love to hear your thoughts and get a recommendation from you. Thank you very much for watching this video. It really means a lot, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.